You're listening to episode 3 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Today, I'm going to be talking about picky eating. Why are kids picky, and is it possible to turn finicky eaters into adventurous eaters? You'll be surprised. The answer is yes. Joining me will be Sally Sampson. She is the founder of Chop Chop Kids, the nonprofit publisher of Chop Chop, the fun cooking magazine for families. Amazing magazine, if you haven't seen it. This was actually named the Publication of the Year by the James Beard Foundation back in 2013. Sally has written not one, not two, but 23 cookbooks. So she knows a thing or two about cooking, especially with kids. She's a mom of 2. And she has written a book called The Picky Eater Project, 6 Weeks to Happier, Healthier Family Mealtimes. Before Sally joins me, I also want to let you know that we're going to be sharing 2 recipes on the show today. The first for a raw Brussels sprout salad. And if you don't think Brussels sprouts would ever cross your kids' lips or your lips, I promise you that you are going to be a big fan of Brussels sprouts once you try this recipe. It's really easy. It's crunchy. It's sweet. It's just pretty awesome. And then I'm also going to be telling you about another recipe from Chop Chop for carrot salad made with mint and honey and lime juice and peanuts, or not peanuts, depending if you like them, or you can serve them to your family. It's a really delicious recipe. So lots of veggie talk today. And, for those of you whose kids, something like, carrots with ranch dip, then this is sort of your natural progression to yet another vegetable recipe. And I'll tell you, whether you have picky eaters or not, I still think you're going to love this episode because we have so many ideas for making vegetables more appealing, for including your kids in the cooking process. And Sally even tells us, as you'll learn soon, that she's even got grandparents who subscribe to the magazine. Speaking of the magazine, we do have a giveaway going on Liz's Healthy Table. So head on over to my website, and on the blog, I'm going to share the carrot salad recipe and information on how you can enter the giveaway to win a 1-year subscription to Chop Chop. US only, please. And then also on Liz's Healthy Table, you will find show notes from today's show because we have a lot of ground to cover and we have lots of resources to share. The podcast posse, if you want to be part of the posse, which means that you can ask me questions. We can brainstorm topics for future podcast episodes. We are going to be doing some exclusive Facebook Lives. So if you head on over to the podcast page on Liz's Healthy Table, in the sidebar, I've got a little button there and it says join the podcast posse, and that'll take you over to the page, and you just click join, and then I'll accept you with open arms and welcome you into the closed group. Before we get started, I would like to thank my sponsors. Without them, I would not be able to bring this podcast to you. I'd like to thank Zespri Kiwi Fruit. They are the global leader in premium quality kiwi fruit. Zespri Sun Gold kiwi fruit is a special type of kiwi fruit. It has a tropical sweet taste and a smooth, hairless skin, plus a juicy yellow flesh. And we always think of kiwis as green. Sun Golds are golden. This is a healthy snack that you can eat whether you're on the go or you're sitting at home. You just slice it in half, scoop it with a spoon. So sweet, so delicious, so nutritious. And Sun Golds will be available in grocery stores across the U.S. starting this month. You can learn more at zesprikiwi.com. I also would like to thank Bush's Beans. You know I am a huge fan of canned beans, black beans, pinto beans, Great Northern beans, just about any beans. Possibilities are endless. You can learn more about Bush's Beans at bushbeans.com. superhealthykids.com. And then always love to give a shout out to superhealthykids.com. Whether you have picky eaters or not, their blog is filled with recipe ideas. And of course, it's all about recipes. So superhealthykids.com. So who's ready to tackle picky eating? I know I am. I know a lot of you must be based on all the questions I get from you. So let's go ahead and welcome Sally Sampson to the show. Welcome, Sally.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I am so happy you're on the show. I have to tell you, I have wanted to have you on my show, even though Liz's Healthy Table is a new show. Cooking with the Moms was on the air since 2008. So I've really wanted to have you on for a long time. So thanks for making the time to join me today.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. I gave you a brief intro earlier, talking about all the cookbooks that you've written and Chop Chop magazine, but just give us a little bit of the Sally backstory. You've got a couple kids. You're a big foodie. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Let's see. I don't really know where to start. So my background, as you know, is as a cookbook writer and magazine contributor. I did that for many, many years. And then I had kids. My kids are now 22 and 24. But what was really a life-changing, career-changing, everything-changing thing that happened is that my daughter was diagnosed with a chronic illness when she was 1. She's fine, but it really changed the course of my career because I began to feel that I didn't want to just write more cookbooks. I wanted to do something that was more meaningful. So that's when I launched Chop Chop, because the idea of Chop Chop was to get pediatricians to prescribe cooking during well-child visits. So that really changed everything for me, and I've been doing that for 7 years.
So Chop Chop has been around for 7 years. And, for some of our listeners, they may have seen your magazine in their pediatrician's office, right?
Yes. So Chop Chop is a kids/family cooking magazine for kids 2 to 12. And we are national. In fact, we're international. We're in about 22 countries, but we're distributed in many, many pediatricians' offices across the country. And we're also, you can subscribe. Chop Chop is in community health clinics, it's in SNAP programs, WIC programs, health centers, after schools. So you can get it sort of wherever you find children.
And I will tell you, I've cooked from the magazine. So even if you don't have kids, this is a magazine. I teased the Brussels sprout salad at the top of the show. I am just crazy over that recipe, and we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. But the reason you're on today is to talk about picky eating. And the reason I chose you, Sally, for this assignment is because obviously the magazine really is perfect if you have kids who are a little bit hesitant, to try new foods, but also because you wrote a book called The Picky Eater Project, 6 weeks to happier, healthier family mealtimes. That's a big sell there. So tell us a little bit about the Picky Eater Project.
Well, I'll tell you how it started. So a woman who I had been working with a little bit, who worked at WGBH, a local TV/radio station in Boston, she and I were meeting, and she all of a sudden said to me, my children, they only eat, she had twins. She had at that time 2-year-old twins. And she said, one just eats frozen meatballs and the other eats, she just went on to talk about all the foods that they ate that she didn't want them to be eating. And I looked at her and I said, and they're doing the grocery shopping?
I say that too.
Right. And she sort of looked at me and said, okay, busted. I said, your kids are so young that you really could change how they eat. They don't have to eat like that. You're in control. Like, kind of, what are you doing? And let me back up also by saying that I hadn't really done anything on picky eating at this point, except that anytime I went anywhere to talk about Chop Chop and asked people if they had questions, inevitably 90% of the questions were people asking about picky eating. And I began to see that it was really a big issue. So back to her. So we started talking about her taking back some control. I said to her, if I pitch this idea to the New York Times, will you do it? And she said yes. And so I pitched the idea to the New York Times, the Motherlode column, and I got this column. And so we did this program with her. The idea was that it would take 6 to 8 weeks to get her twins back on track. And actually, because they were so young, it took about 2 weeks. It was so easy. We gave her some rules and it worked incredibly. And a large part of it was that she included them in the process. So, for instance, the first time they ever did anything, her husband took them to the grocery store and said, we're going to cook dinner for mommy and we're going to make turkey burgers. And you can pick one of you can pick the vegetable we're going to eat. Okay. One of you can pick because turkey burgers were like not esoteric. They weren't super far from what the kids' comfort was. It wasn't like they said, they're going to do something really crazy. They did something that the kids could sort of tolerate. And each one got to pick a fruit, one got to pick a vegetable. And I can't remember honestly what they picked, but they picked something, and because they had chose it, they were invested in how it turned out and ate it. And even the first night was pretty successful. And then they did omelets where she would mix up the eggs and, have the kids stand by the stove, and they got to pick what went in the eggs. And it was flawless. Anyway, so I did it again in the New York Times with another 2 kids, and that worked out really well. And then decided to do it as a book. That's sort of how it started.
Right. And, you mentioned that you have these rules. And I think when people hear the word rule, they start to get kind of stressed out. Like, ooh, what do you mean a rule? That seems mean. But I've always said that rules are great as long as you're reasonable and as long as you can enforce them. Like, so for example, when my kids were younger, and I thought we could go back and forth and talk a little bit about our own families and families like you've worked with. And I would say to Josh, he's the big brother, and now he's 22 and Simon's 18. But I would say to Josh when he was younger, listen, Simon looks up to you. So anything you do, anything you say, anything you eat, he's going to follow you. I mean, this is why Simon really was potty trained by 18 months old, because he just looked at his brother and said, hey, I'm done, right? So at the table, I would say to Josh, listen, I put a lot of time and effort into making this dinner. So if you diss my meal by kind of saying, ooh, that's yucky or gross, if you diss, you're dismissed. And I sort of said it as a joke. If you diss, you're dismissed. It was a rule that I could totally enforce, because all you have to do once he disses the meal is pick him up and he leaves the table. And it's going to be like a freak out moment, but you only have to do it once. It's like Ferberizing your baby, right? Exactly. So you do it one time. So he knew if I diss mom's meal, I'm going to have to leave the table, and I don't want to leave the table. So he was always really pleasant, and he would try stuff and eat stuff, and so Simon would follow. So that was a rule that didn't seem mean at all, kind of made fun of it or had fun with it, and I could totally enforce that. So I think, when parents start to get into a program and set some rules and set some parameters and start to enjoy the process of feeding their kids, this whole picky thing starts to turn into a little bit more of an adventure. What do you think? Like, what are some of the things that you would, suggest in terms of what's worked for you or what else has worked for families? Because you mentioned this mom who, they go to the grocery store, they're cooking together, they're investing the kids in the process.
So I wish I had talked to you before I did the book, because actually it's interesting to think about the word rules, because you're right. People think rules, that's, sort of mean-spirited and it's very rigid, and our rules are not that at all. I mean, I'll just read you a couple of them. One is that as parents, we will be good role models. We will only ask the kids to eat foods that we are willing to eat ourselves. I mean, that's sort of goes without saying. And I think one of the things that does make parents a little bit uncomfortable, I should say this doesn't make brand new parents uncomfortable. It makes parents who are in the process with picky eaters uncomfortable, which is, as parents, we will decide what foods are offered when and where. So what we really say is it's your job as the parent to set the boundaries and to say, this is what I'm serving. It's the kid's job to eat or not. So we don't believe, and I'm a little bit unusual in this way, I don't think kids have to taste things. So for instance, the idea of like a child has to have one bite, I do not subscribe to that at all. My feeling is if you came to my house and you as Liz, you came to my house and I had broccoli rabe and you said no thanks.
Oh my gosh, how did you know I hate broccoli rabe?
Do you really?
That's the one food I will not eat.
Oh, that's so funny. I can make you eat it.
No,
I can figure out how to make you eat it.
I won't do it.
I can. I don't mean make. I can tell you a great recipe.
Okay,
but anyway,
good.
I would not say to you, Liz, you have to take one bite. So my feeling is you should treat children with respect. So if somebody's turned off by something, I don't think you should make them do it. So the main thing really about picky eating is the parent controls the meal. The parent says, this is dinner. And then if you want to eat, eat. If you don't want to eat, don't eat.
Right.
That's like the biggest thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, when you really kind of change this mindset of, hey, this is a child, they should really not be treated any differently from anybody else. And we all have different likes and dislikes. You can follow all the rules, you can use all the techniques, but at the end of the day, if a child says, I don't feel like eating that today, or maybe I'm just not hungry, or maybe I'm in a growth spurt and I'm ravenous. So their appetites change just like ours, if not even to more of an extreme, just because I think their growth is changing so much. So their appetite changes.
Right. I mean, I think that, so like in my house, when my kids were little, I was always working on a cookbook. So I was making also, I mean, I probably never made two of the same meal ever because I was always testing recipes. So my deal with my children starting at about 2 was, this is dinner. If you don't like it, you can get yourself plain yogurt, cottage cheese, or cereal. And our cereals were not sugared cereals. So, they were just like plain cereals. And at 2, they would paddle from the table and they would go get those things if they wanted it. And recently when I was working on the book, I asked my children if I had really done that. I thought, did I really do that? Like, I think I did that. But they both said that I did, but that it wasn't really worth it to not try what I was making because they weren't being rewarded with like this great alternative. Yogurt, cottage cheese, and cereal, that's fine, but maybe it's worth trying the chicken. So as a result, I mean, I don't know, if I'm just lucky, but neither of my children were picky eaters. They almost always ate what was in front of them.
When my kids were younger, I used to really make a big effort to make the food appealing. So like you had mentioned, hey, if I had Liz coming over, I'm having a little dinner party, you're going to make a big effort. So when my kids were younger, every meal I just said, I'm going to put the extra time in and I'm going to think about making this really appealing. And so if I were to cook up some vegetables, I might drizzle with some olive oil or saute in some olive oil and garlic or add a little Parmesan cheese. Hey, if I don't want to just eat steamed broccoli, I'm going to make this more interesting. And many years ago, when we used to have team soccer snacks, you'd be assigned to bring the oranges for halftime. I would go to great pains to cut up those oranges so they looked really appealing and into sort of those smile sections. But some parents would sort of cut them into these big chunks. I don't know how they did it. It was a little awkward, almost like the orange would be cut into 4 quarters or something. That's redundant, but you know what I mean. So Simon would say to me, Mom, some of the parents don't know how to cut up oranges. The kids are just not going to eat it that way. I'm like,
so funny.
Yeah. So, a little tweak can go a long way to making that food more appealing. So you've talked about investing your kids in the process, cooking with your kids, shopping with your kids. That's really powerful stuff once you get those kids involved, because then, you always hear, oh, they're more likely to try it if they help you cook it. But it really is true.
It really is true. I mean, we see this in Chop Shop all the time in photo shoots, is that we'll give, so mostly the parents are not there during a photo shoot. And so we'll give a recipe to a kid for them to test. And let's say it's kale. They're not going to say to me, no, I don't like kale, because they're trying to be good, and so they make the recipe, they taste it, there's zero issue. They come back and they say to their parent, look what I made, or they tell them what they made. And inevitably the parent will say, really? You made kale? or broccoli or whatever it is, hummus. And again, the kids are invested. They're making it. They're really excited. I always say that it's like having artwork. The kid comes home from school and they want you to put it on the refrigerator. They want you to hang it up. So it's the same thing with food that they've made. They're proud of it. They want to show it off.
I love that analogy. And also, I've always said to parents over time, it's sort of how you frame it. You could present that kale salad and say, honey, I'm not really sure you're going to like it, but why don't you try it? Versus having your child actually make it for the family. And
right.
Of course they're going to try it. Why wouldn't they try it?
Right. And the other thing is, if you say, we did an event once where kids were making their own sodas. So it was like seltzer and a bunch of different juices. And a kid came over. He was all excited. And his mother rushed over and said, Bobby, you don't like seltzer. And it was so counterproductive because the kid would have made it and loved it. And I think he ended up staying and he did make it. But parents give their kids so much negative messaging.
So start positive.
Exactly.
Keep it positive. Yeah, totally agree with that. Let me just back up too and just say that picky eating is sort of normal or natural. If you think about prehistoric times, we were hunters and gatherers. You kind of have to be skeptical when you see a new food. You have to assess it. You have to think, is this safe to eat or not safe to eat? So I think there's something biological there. What does the science tell us? Just when you were researching the book, did you dig up anything interesting kind of in that area?
Well, the science is that, picky eating is a thing, and it is natural and normal to have the response exactly as you say. And actually, sort of related to that, when we're talking about picky eating, we're talking about kind of your run-of-the-mill kid. There are kids who really do have sensory issues or who have things that are not, we don't define as picky eating. We're talking about the kid who doesn't taste the thing, turns his nose up, and won't do it. We're not talking about kids who have sensory issues, who have other issues that are not this. So, sometimes people react to picky eating and say, you don't understand because they have a more complicated child. We're not talking about that.
Right. We're talking more like if you look at the bell curve, sort of who falls in the middle.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know what? I've got a podcast posse on Facebook. And for those who've joined it, I always say, hey, Sally Sampson's going to be my guest this week. Do you have any questions? And so Jacqueline is a mom here, and she said, I'd like to hear Sally's comments about texture and what is real versus imaginary. And then Michelle said, yes, my daughter gags with textured foods. I'm sure she makes up her mind before it even touches her tongue. So some kids are sensitive to textures, and others, it might just be they're getting used to a new texture. And I know I had mentioned to you that I wanted to kind of just touch on this texture thing a little bit.
So I am not a doctor. My co-author is a doctor, and she would have a more intelligent answer. She would have an answer based on real science. But here's my thing. If your daughter is gagging at foods, don't make her eat them. Leave it alone. One of the other things that we find a lot with picky eaters is that if you give them a lot of airtime for their picky eating, they're going to keep doing it. So, for instance, I don't like things like puddings. I just don't eat them. I've tried them. I don't like them. I love crunchy things, so I would not make a thing of it. I wouldn't push anything on her daughter, even if it's in her mind. If you force her to eat stuff or if you try to talk her out of it, it's not going to help.
Right. So just go on to a texture she enjoys and then kind of ease her into the other textures.
Exactly.
And as kids grow up, their taste buds mature. That's one of the things I always say when I'm doing cooking classes with kids. I say, you might not love something today, but in a year or two, you might love it because your taste buds change. I used to say this to my boys all the time. Hey, Andy next door, he was like their teen idol. Andy next door loves tomatoes. I think you'll love them too. Right. Maybe not today, but one day. So you're empowering them to, you're giving them that opening to say, all right, maybe I'll give it another try.
One other thing I might suggest to her is to have someone who is not her offer up a food to her daughter that her daughter normally gags at and see if she has the same reaction. So when my children were little, a lot of the time they'd have play dates, and the mother would call me later and say, oh my God, my kid never eats blah, 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 but they did. They don't like it. And because they were in a different setting, they would try it, or they weren't trying to get their mother's attention, or, all those things. It happened a lot. I mean, I might try that with this situation.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I remember too, when Simon was in kindergarten, his friend Josh came over and we had edamame. I steamed up the whole edamame in the pod and then drizzled it with a little olive oil and kosher salt and put it out. And Josh, who was at that time very picky, he's now a big strapping, baseball player who eats everything. But at the time, he was super picky, according to his mom. So I put the edamame out, and Simon and I were eating them. You might get one little edamame bean, you might get 3 or 4, and we were just having a blast. They're shooting and popping all over the room. And Josh, of course, is getting more and more curious, and before you know it, he's eating the edamame. Well, a 5-year-old goes home and tells his mom about this. He absolutely cannot pronounce edamame. She has to call me up and say, what on earth did you give Josh today? He's been talking about this food and cannot pronounce it. So that is a great tip, is to set up a play date if you have to and see if it works. Hey, Pam here, she's a mom. I think she's got 6 kids, and she says, my picky eaters are more willing to try new foods when included in food prep. Like you said before, Sally, when they see that a weird food is made of all things they like, they just might give it a try. So, she might be assembling a casserole or something, but all those elements are ultimately familiar to them. So, so they're in the kitchen, they're cooking, and they're like, not so weird. I'll go for it.
I think cooking is I think it is a rare picky eater that doesn't respond to that. We have found every now and then that there's a kid who doesn't eat, won't eat anything, and he just likes to cook and still doesn't eat it, likes to share it. I think that's fine, but I think 90% of kids will respond to cooking it themselves.
Yeah, and I've seen that kid who does enjoy cooking but is very hesitant to try. But I would say stick with it, because one day they might just take that bite. So veggies, that's a big question I get from parents, and that is, how do I make vegetables more appealing? And so the 2 recipes we're going to kind of go through today are from Chop Chop carrot salad and a Brussels sprout salad. But I thought, Sally, we could go back and forth just for a couple of minutes and talk about vegetables, the dreaded green vegetable, and how you make it more appealing. You talked about a kale salad before, and that child who got involved, and, sometimes kids will rub olive oil into the leaves and it kind of softens the leaves up a little or tenderizes the leaves. And then they wash their hands first, but they give that a try. But what else can you do with vegetables? We're going to talk about the raw crunchy salads, but what about things like roasting?
Roasting is the thing. I mean, so we're doing a cooking class right now with the Girl Scouts, and yesterday they did red onion, butternut squash, and Brussels sprouts. And, they were like, ooh, Brussels sprouts. They love them. I mean, basically my feeling is if anything you roast, you drizzle a little bit of olive oil, salt, and pepper, and it's going to taste good. I mean, we've seen kids over and over it's just eye-popping. Broccoli, cauliflower, roasting. Anything roasted is fantastic.
You did a taste test in one of your Chop Chop issues where you had kids trying vegetables in sort of a different state, right? Maybe raw, some kids like that crunch, or roasted, or with a dip. Is that something parents could do at home? Do sort of set up a little taste test to say, hey, I really think you're going to love broccoli, but there's 3 different ways you can make broccoli. Let's try them and see which of those 3 ways you prefer.
We have in every issue of Chop Chop a taste test. I will tell you the funniest taste test I did with the original twins from the Picky Eater Project. So I went to their house and I brought 4 different dips with me. And really what I was trying to do was to see if they would eat vegetables, raw vegetables. I also brought cauliflower, carrots, broccoli, and I feel like I had one other vegetable. Maybe it was a snow pea or something like that. But I focused their attention on the dips. And I asked them which dips they liked. And, so they would try the hummus, for instance, and they would try it with a carrot. And I'd say, see how it tastes on the cauliflower. They had no issue at all with any of the vegetables. And sometimes it's a delivery system for something else. But then once they see, well, I had the cauliflower with the hummus, now they could eat the cauliflower. I think that that's a kind of taste test you could do where the kid doesn't even realize it. The same thing is you could take a piece of broccoli and you could try it raw. You could grate the stem. You could steam it. You could roast it. Those are great examples. We've also done taste tests we've done a million taste tests where we show them what happens when you add salt to something or you add different kinds of salt. So soy sauce, regular salt, kosher salt, that kind of thing. Or just what happens if you put curry powder on something or you put chili on it. Kids who normally say, oh, I don't eat anything spicy, they get also invested in the game of it, which is really fun.
I like that idea, turning it into a game.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So if you were going to roast broccoli florets, just tell everybody how you would do it.
So there are two schools of thought on this, if you can believe it. One is that you preheat the pan. So you put the pan in the oven and you get the temperature up to 425. And in the meantime, you've chopped up broccoli, including the stem. You drizzle olive oil, salt, and pepper, and then you dump the whole thing on the hot pan. You do get a slightly better kind of char that way. But even if you don't do that, it's not quite as safe with kids. So when I'm doing this with kids, I'd rather have them start on a cold sheet pan. And so you dump the broccoli on there, you put it in the oven. I like everything very charred, really. So I personally go a little bit farther, but I would say, start checking at 15 minutes, depending on broccoli, for instance, look and see, is it the color and the texture that you want? But cauliflower, almost everything works that way.
Do you turn it halfway through?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. So you can, when I'm doing stuff with kids, I like to engage as little as possible with the hot oven. I don't think that it's necessary. Again, you can preheat the pan if you want or not. You can turn or not if you want. I'm pretty relaxed about all these things. But I think, what you want is for the kid to think it's fun. And so it doesn't have to be the absolute perfect way you would eat it.
And you could do this with any vegetables, Brussels sprouts, asparagus spears. I actually love roasting those. Baby carrots you can roast. My dad actually is very picky with vegetables and very, very sensitive to textures, but that's because he has false teeth and that's what happens when you're 87. But I will take baby carrots and I will toss them with kosher salt, black pepper. I might add some fresh thyme, little bits of thyme, and I'll roast those. I'll toss them halfway through. And they get nice and tender. In the case of my dad, really tender. And they get so sweet. It's really like eating candy.
It's absolutely true. I mean, everything sweetens when it's roasted. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I haven't successfully roasted. The only thing that I will say is that sometimes if you're roasting two different things together, like let's say you want to do broccoli and cauliflower together, cauliflower takes longer. So you really do want to do them separately. You can do two sides of the pan is fine, but you learn over time. Sometimes when I'm doing something like butternut squash, I'll microwave it first so that it doesn't take longer than the Brussels sprouts.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Things like that. It's really, roasting is, I would say, pay attention to a recipe, but more importantly, look and see what appeals to you because people are going to like different levels of tenderness and brownness and all that kind of thing.
Something else I noticed that you do in the magazine is that you serve things in lettuce cups, which is so adorable. Like you might make mini meatballs or sliders or a salad, a chicken salad. And I'm noticing that you do things in lettuce cups. Is that just because it's too darn cute to resist?
No, actually, we don't really do much cute stuff. Like, we don't do faces. We don't do that sort of thing. The thing about the lettuce cups and the lettuce leaves is that it's really, instead of bread, it's a little bit more festive. So it's fun. The lettuce cups were for a holiday party, so it just makes it a little bit more festive.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right. Raw Brussels sprout salad. This recipe was in your spring 2017 issue, and we've been talking about roasting vegetables, but this is a raw salad. I made this salad and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the best salad I've ever had. So I want you to tell everybody, if you have that recipe in front of you right now, what ingredients go into that recipe and how do you prepare it? And why is this something that kids would enjoy helping you make and eating?
Well, first, let me tell you the story of the salad. So I was with friends in LA and we went to a restaurant, and I'm blocking the name, but my friend and I arrived first before her husband, and we both ordered this salad. And I mean, it was a slight variation on the one that's in Chop Chop, but it was basically this. And we were like you, this is the best thing I have ever eaten. I had never had a raw Brussels sprout salad, and we just thought it was amazing. And then her husband arrived, and he ordered one, and he ordered something else, and we took his. We could not stop eating it. And it's really funny to think about that could be something that's so amazing. So what this salad is it's raw Brussels sprouts. In the case of Chop Chop, we did apples, but you could do apples, you could do pears, you could do sort of any kind of fruit. Nuts, again, any kind of nuts. I think the original recipe it might have either had Marcona almonds or almonds. And I think, I don't actually have the recipe in front of me, but I've made it so many times, I think I can probably get it right. So it's Brussels sprouts, hard fruit, nuts, and cheese. And in the original recipe, it was smoked Gouda. And most of the time, not even just for Chop Chop, but I'll do cheddar. And then it's just a vinaigrette. It's oil, vinegar, and mustard. Am I right?
Dijon. Yep. It's just, yep, that's very simple.
It's like the easiest recipe in the world. You just cut up all these different vegetables. I mean, all these things. And what's nice about it is you have the kind of bitterness from the Brussels sprouts. You have the sweetness from the apple. You have the kind of crunchy, earthy thing from the nuts, and then you have the creamy thing from the cheese. So it's like texturally and flavor, it's got everything. And it just sounds so weird, but I feel like every person who's ever made it gets hooked. Mm-hmm. Kids, adults, people who hate Brussels sprouts, people who hate apples. I mean, there's something about this combination that is intoxicating. I mean, there was a while when, I'm not exaggerating it, I ate it every day.
I love that. I will say,
but it's fun to make.
When I made this, I took the Brussels sprouts and I sort of I always trim them a little bit because sometimes those outer leaves are yucky. And then I ended up slicing them in half lengthwise. I placed the flat side of the Brussels sprouts on the cutting board, and then I with a little paring knife, very thinly just sliced the sprouts. And it took no time at all. They were like these little thin shreds almost. And then the apples, you say to take a small apple, you core it, and then you thinly slice that. So you've got this in all these, like you said, crunchy sliced veggies and fruits. I think I used walnuts. You say you could use walnuts or almonds, but so simple. And like you say, intoxicating. I love that word. So I encourage everybody to give this a try because, if your kids are more into crunch than they are into, say, the sweet roasted veggies, I would totally go for this recipe. And you could add to it. You could add grilled chicken to it. You could add grilled shrimp to it. So it doesn't just have to be a side salad. You could turn this into a main meal, I would say.
I agree. And also, I mean, cutting Brussels sprouts is not obviously for a 5-year-old, but there's no reason that the adult couldn't cut the Brussels sprouts and then have the a younger child throw in the nuts and throw in the cheese. It lends itself to almost any level of participation you want. The other thing is that, I don't know, am I allowed to say a grocery store that has something you could use?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So Trader Joe's has it's broccoli slaw. And I believe it's made from the stem of the broccoli. So it's got, sort of a little bit of the flavor, that kind of slightly bitter thing. And so if you're feeling lazy and you don't want to do the Brussels sprouts, you can buy that and substitute it. And it's also fantastic.
I like that. The lazy tip to the salad.
Exactly.
Why not?
Right.
So some people listening might say, again, my picky eater, my finicky eater would never eat that. So would your advice be then to have your child make it with you and see if they try it in that situation? That
is going to be my advice in every situation. Have your kid make it with you, or say to them, I want to make this salad. I can't decide. Should I do apples or pears? Or should I do almonds or walnuts? Should we toast the almonds? I would just engage them as much as you can possibly engage them. And if they don't eat it, they don't eat it.
Good tip. Something I have on my website on Liz's Healthy Table, something that I would also say, and I have this free download on Liz's Healthy Table. Just go over to the freebies section, and it's a recipe reviewer chart. And what this does is it's a chart, and when you're trying a new recipe, you just write down the name of the recipe, and then you ask your child to be the recipe reviewer. Did you like it? Were you neutral on it? Did you dislike it? You could use a little smiley face or a frown face, and then you could reward them. You might say, for every recipe you review, you're going to get a sticker, and after 10 stickers, you're going to be able to go out and buy a new soccer ball, or, something that might entice your child to become invested. And, again, you said you don't want to force anyone to try anything, but if your child is willing to try, then this is a great way to make it a little more of a game and have some fun with it.
I also think that, I love this idea of them reviewing, but I love the idea also of saying to them, don't just say it's icky. Don't just tell me why you don't like this recipe. And because then you're getting information rather than, because again, anybody is entitled not to like things. You could not force me to eat peanut butter or a boiled egg. I will not eat them. I have had both. I'm a grown-up. I'm not eating them. And I think a child should be allowed to have the same thing. I don't like this, but why don't you like it? And then it doesn't feel random to the parent. It's it's too spicy. My daughter used to not like seltzer. She said that it stung. And okay, that's fair. Obviously I didn't care if she drank seltzer or not, but so you begin to understand why they don't like what they don't like.
Right. If something is too spicy, my boys used to be like, I don't want to eat that. It's burning. It's that, too much ginger for them was always a no-no. And they're sensitive to it. That's fine.
Right.
I'll lay off the ginger. Hey, tell me how I would love broccoli rabe or broccoli rabe. What can you do to make me love that?
Okay, so let me ask you something. Do you like cauliflower?
I love cauliflower, but broccoli rabe is bitter.
What about, do you like provolone or cheddar cheese?
I love it.
Okay. So again, a stolen recipe. There's a place near me that makes a sandwich that is roasted cauliflower. They don't roast it. When I do it, I roast it. They fry it. But my version is roasted cauliflower, steamed broccoli rabe, cheese. I also do jalapenos. You might not like the jalapenos on bread as a sandwich. And what I would say in your case is do mostly roasted cauliflower and do a little bit of broccoli rabe. It's to die for. It's in the way that, and you do it on something like focaccia, and you do it with the cheese, and so the cheese mellows out the bitterness. Try it.
I will.
It's amazing. The other thing with broccoli rabe is you can do with white beans, same thing, mellows out the bitterness, creamy, really good. I'll send you a recipe.
Well, thank you. I think it's probably for me having broccoli rabe on the side on its own. It's it's too much. But hey, other than that, I pretty much eat just about anything. And I'm happy to report that my boys do as well. And that's because, as kids get older, they get really hungry, but they've had years of exposure and then they're on their own. When my boys were younger, I'd roast Brussels sprouts. Simon ate them like crazy. Josh, a little more hesitant, but now he's like a starving, college student. It's like, whatever, lay it out there. I'll eat anything. Carrot salad. I made the carrot salad from Chop Chop, which was 3 large carrots that you scrub and you peel and then you grate on the large holes of a box grater so they're kind of shredded. And then you just combine the carrots with the juice of a lime and the zest, half a lime. You add honey, chopped mint. You call for peanuts if you like peanuts. I think I added almonds because that's what I had on hand, a little bit of salt. And this little carrot salad was so delicious and just kind of a nice change of pace from your basic baby carrot and ranch dip. I love that salad.
Thank you. Very simple. I mean, one of the other things that we do in Chop Chop is after each recipe, let's say the recipe calls for peanuts. We'll have a thing that says, you can also use almonds or pistachio nuts, or instead of lime juice, you can use lemon juice. Instead of lemon juice, you can use vinegar. We also want kids to learn, okay, I don't like lime, so does that mean I don't make this recipe? No, I make it with something different. Or I don't like nuts at all, or I'm allergic to nuts, leave them out. So what we want is for kids to learn how to cook using our recipes, but most importantly, to learn what they like and get to a point where they can feel comfortable adapting a recipe, but we give them the tools. And the carrot salad is really a perfect example of that because everything in it can be changed.
Yep. And I like this as a side salad, or if you're into the bowl meals, like I love bowl meals where it's like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So you can have that carrot salad as one component.
Right.
I'm a big fan of hard-boiled eggs. It sounds like you're not. I love them. I could eat them every day. Thank you very much. But you know what? Why not celebrate your dislikes? My husband does not love cucumber. And when my boys were younger, I'd say, Dad doesn't love cucumber. He's not going to eat it, but that's more for us. So again, acknowledging that it's normal not to love everything and that why not? Tim doesn't want it. We'll take it. Thank you. Why not? Although I will say Tim eats English cucumbers. I think it must just be the regular cucumbers, but seems to like the English. So, give it a little tweak and then maybe they'll like it a different way.
Right.
So Sally, if you could fill your bookshelf with a bunch of cookbooks, and I'm sure you have a zillion, but for the folks listening in today, hopefully they'll all subscribe to Chop Chop Magazine. And by the way, is your website chopchop.com?
It's chopchopmag.org.
Chopchopmag.org. And so people can just head on over and subscribe if they want to. We do have a giveaway, U.S. only, but for folks who want to subscribe, what is it a year for a subscription?
$16.95 for 4 quarterly issues.
Okay, so they get an issue every quarter. And the magazine is filled with recipes and different did you know kind of columns, taste test columns, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but if you could grab a book and hand it off to a listener to say, this cookbook is fantastic. You need to have this on your bookshelf. What would that be?
Well, it would be the Chop Chop cookbook.
Oh, do tell. Why do tell?
I mean, so we did a cookbook about 3 years ago, and it's really all the basics that kids need to know how to cook, or really that anyone needs to know how to cook. And I should also say, as a little plug, we also have an online cooking club for kids. It's free. It's chopchopcookingclub.org, and any kid can sign up. And the idea is that there are 12, well, I think it's actually 13 now, recipes that we consider essential for everyone to know how to make. So the first one is smoothies, and they get a little bit harder, not a lot harder, as you go along. But you don't, so it's step by steps, and it really goes over the skills that you need in order to do all these things. So for instance, in the recipe where we teach the skill of peeling a carrot, the idea is now you have mastered that skill. You can peel an apple, you can peel a cucumber, you can peel a potato, all those things. It's a great thing for any kid. I mean, it's great for any adult. It teaches you all the skills you need to know, and the basic recipes.
So I will say my son Josh is 22, and my biggest regret with him. He's a great eater. He just does not want to cook. And he's like Mr. Wall Street wannabe. Yeah. So he thinks he's going to quote unquote hire somebody. Okay. I'm like, oh, you kind of need to know how to cook, buddy. He does an omelet beautifully, but I think I'm going to hint to Josh that he should join. He'll probably give me a dirty look, but yeah.
He would not be the only 20-something
really
at all. In fact, we have a few adults.
Oh, good.
We have plenty of grandmothers who subscribe to Chop Chop for themselves. I mean, we've had them call us up and say, if this is just for me, and can you have more of X kind of recipe? I mean, it's really sort of basic stuff and not so basic, but it's for anyone. It just happens that we're focused on kids.
Mm-hmm. Good. I love that. And what about, I love asking my guests this, but is there a chef or a cookbook author or somebody out there that you just say, oh my gosh, I want to meet that person, or I've met this person and they're sort of up on a pedestal. Anybody like that in your world? I say, who's your chef crush, but it might not be a chef crush necessarily.
I don't actually think I have one.
I should have asked you this in our pre-interview, Sally. You could have pondered this.
I could have. I mean, in a way where it's not that we're anti-chef, but we're trying, a chef's job is to, in a sense, do stuff you can't do. Like either whether it's through technique or using esoteric ingredients. I mean, the most interesting chefs are doing stuff that we can't do at home, or are unlikely to do at home. And what Chop Chop is about is actually the opposite. It's how to break the thing down so that it's not esoteric, it's not a secret, it's just simple. And so we're kind of the opposite. So it's hard for me to answer that question.
Well, I will say that sometimes, and I think if you're a great chef, then you're able to translate some of those secrets. Like, so for example, and I say this all the time, I love Yotam Ottolenghi.
Yeah.
And I love his cookbooks. I will say sometimes I tweak his recipes because I have to go to Penzeys and get the spices, and then I have to go to Whole Foods, right, and then I'm at the Stop and Shop. And so it's a bigger deal than sort of that every day. Break it down. And yeah, that is what I love about Chop Chop, because your recipes are so simple, but they're special too. I mean, the Brussels sprout salad, couple minutes to make, everyday ingredients, but it's the way you combine them that kind of has that little wow factor.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
That's our intention.
I get it. So anything else you want to say, Sally, about picky eaters? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. We could probably go on and on all day, but is there one little kernel of advice that you want to share with listeners before we let you off the hook here?
I think the biggest thing really for me with picky eating is to have the parent relax a little and not make it such a big deal. Most kids, not kids who have sensory issues and failure to thrive and things like that. I'm putting those kids aside. Most kids will eat when they're hungry and will relax. We'll fight less if the parent doesn't make it a big deal.
So just enjoy it. Enjoy the process.
Exactly.
I always say, you teach your kids how to read and write. You teach them how to ride a bike. You teach them how to love vegetables. You teach them how to love a variety of foods. If you frame it that way, it doesn't seem like this big mystery world. It's a normal thing to add to your to-do list.
Exactly.
As a parent. Well, Sally, thank you so much for joining us on today's show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that was a lot of great advice. And I just want to remind everybody to head on over to lizshealthytable.com. On the podcast page, I'm going to have the show notes from today's show. So lots of resources, lots of links. And then on the blog, I'm going to give you step-by-step that carrot salad recipe, compliments of Chop Chop, and information on how you can enter the giveaway to win a 1-year subscription to the magazine. So head on over and don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, and Twitter. Until next time, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.